This week's videos are going to turn a bit. They're going to move into speaking about spirituality and religion. The comments I made or will make are not meant to insult anyone's spirituality, but they will definitely ridicule religion. And part of the reason for that, you need to understand, is systems logic. And there's 4 or 5 different laws or theories and projections people have put out that basically talk about how once any organization is created, ultimately it ends up getting misguided from its own original goals in order to protect the system itself. Now, I don't want to speak about all religions, that's true to some extent of all religions, but I'm more focused on the religion I grew up in, which is Roman Catholicism. I was born Roman Catholic. My first epiphany happened in the Catholic Church. So I believed that God and the Catholic Church were right. This continued into university, where upon studying church history, I learned some shocking facts that actually strike to the very core of the Christian religion in general, because it goes back to the Council of Nicaea, where Jesus was deemed God. That is not true. Now, if your spirituality is built on that, it's understandable that spirituality you developed was based on a misguided sentiment of your religion, or the religion you started from. Religion serves the purpose of helping you and guiding you to start a spiritual life. But at least in the Christian religion, it's supposed to inspire you to actually have a relationship with God, not a devotion to the rules of your church. And when you actually look at the Old Testament and the New Testament, most of the prophets and holy people had to challenge their church. Jesus himself was targeted by the Pharisees and the rabbis precisely because things he was saying didn't serve their purposes. And this is what happens in systems and organizations. The system itself is tasked with a goal, but then it starts to see protecting that goal requires protecting the system itself, which of course then means protecting the hierarchy that controls the system. But over time, the goal gets displaced by religious survival rather than the truth it started with. And so let's back up and start with my story. Some of you have heard it before. It's in my book that are memoirs of when I found out I was autistic, and look back over time through my life to reanalyze it from the lens of understanding I was autistic, which led to a lot of forgiveness for people that had hurt me through my life. When I was 7 years old, one of the parishioners who had been to Africa, and I think he had gone for UNICEF, if I remember correctly, came back with slides that were shown of children starving in Africa in an area that had been hit by a plague. At least if I remember correctly, it was a plague. And I was shocked by these pictures. In fact, it was probably one of the fewest times I sat completely still in church. Because as well as being autistic, I'm ADHD, and that was a real problem when I was a child. I was very definitely hyperactive. So sitting still in church for almost an hour was always a challenge. But here I was ramrod straight, but yet every muscle in my body strained. I don't know how to explain it other than they were all super tense just at the horror I was witnessing. Now, some of you may know that autistics are we can be very sensitive in different ways, but we can be very sensitive. I was very sensitive to touch. I could not stand a fly landing on my body. I didn't get bitten by a lot of mosquitoes because I could feel them the instant they landed. Now, obviously, as I've aged, that sensitivity has dialed down. As most elderly people can tell you, we can hurt ourselves and not even feel the pain sometimes. Look and go, when did I get that scar? When did I get that bruise? Because as you gain experience with pain, it's less significant each time. But at that point in my life, a fly landing on my body just drove me nuts. And in one of these pictures, I saw a young African boy sitting in the dirt, looking sad. He had, I guess they were probably lesions or something on his face and arms and legs. And a fly landed near one of these lesions on his face and started walking around. And then, I guess, tried to eat at the lesion. And the boy couldn't be bothered to swat it away. I couldn't imagine how much suffering somebody would have to be going through to not be able to feel a fly on their face and want to swat it away. Because remember, then I didn't know I was autistic. I just assumed my sensitivity to flies was true for everybody. And as my body tensed more and more, and I swear my soul, spirit, and heart just were ready to scream, "No!" as loud as they could. A calmness, a voice entered me. And I will say said, but any of you have had a real epiphany know it's not really said. You don't really hear a voice so much as you have a feeling that has words. And there was just this incredible calm that entered me. And the words I understood were, it doesn't have to be this way. And in that moment, I assumed that was God talking to me. Just made sense. And I still believe that was God, in some sense, talking to me. Now I'll get to that further, because please understand, religions have tried to define God, and they're all wrong. I can say that clearly because definitions put people into boxes, put things into boxes. It's this, it's this, it's this, which means it's not that, it's not that, and it's not that. And that is completely invalid for God. You cannot imprison God in a definition. And if you do, the closest one that fits would be existence. Because God is everything. God is everywhere. God is all that is. I am. If something is, it is part of God. Plain and simple. And yes, that includes each and every one of us, even when we're doing horrendous things like we see happening now. Now, I'm sorry, today's talk is likely going to go a little longer than normal. Consider it more like a sermon, if you wish. So, at the Council of Nicaea, in order to save Christians from death, which is completely understandable, the Founding Fathers agreed to turn God into a Trinity figure in order to appease, I believe it was Emperor Constantine, who wanted a Trinity figure God to somewhat mimic or symbolize the Roman system. And so, what better thing than to say, well, let's just say Jesus was the Son of God, and then we have the Pentecost experience and Old Testament references to the will of God or the breath of God. So we'll just say the Spirit of God, and now we have our Trinity. But the problem was the line they relied on in the New Testament to justify that was the Father and I are one. When Jesus said, the Father and I are one. So the moment they made him God, it became heresy for anyone else to say that. Because now, from the church point of view, you would be saying you are God, and that is heresy. But you are God. You're one very infinitesimal part of God. But you are God. And so decades ago, trying to figure the best way to serve God, if you will, was I decided to try and be like God, since I am God, and adopted all people of the world into my heart as my children. And tried to be a perfect parent. So when I tell you the system I developed is designed for everyone, there's a reason. Because all of you are my children in my heart. And now finally, today, God is allowing me to publicly acknowledge that I am a prophet of God. There are a few things I know that my relationship with God has allowed me to share, which I was not to share before. So when I tell you it doesn't have to be that way, I can actually say it doesn't have to be this way, thus says the Lord. But yet, we have all become so divided or so separated from God, even though we are Him, but separated from His love in a way, that we've all just come to accept people starving to death or malnutrition diseases or other diseases related to starvation are acceptable or just it can't be changed. Oh, that's just the way it is. God doesn't agree with you. So you better change your perspective and change it quickly. And we'll get to the reason for that soon too. Now I'm trying to speak from my heart as God has commanded. I much prefer to have my speeches all written out and ready to go, so I can't go off topic. But there are times I've had speeches completely ready and God had said, yeah, toss that aside. And I did. And oftentimes the result ultimately ended up being better. A couple times it ended up being worse, but that led to better results in the end. Now I want to talk about your relationship with God, because religions have convinced people that you must always be respectful to God. Are you crazy? God is the most, if you will, perfect parent. Let's use that term. You really don't think a parent expects their children to get angry at them when things don't go their way? You really don't expect them to yell and scream and curse and swear? I have done that many times in my life because I've been called to suffering that was just unbelievable at times and overwhelming to my autistic mind. And each and every time, after exhausting my emotions by ranting at God or at Jesus, that same calmness entered me. Didn't always speak, it just entered me to let me know I was loved. That's a real relationship with God, people. Now you are going to have hierarchies in church telling you, oh no, he's a sinful, evil person. Yes, I'm sinful. I've made lots of mistakes in my life, even with God by my side. It happens. And God understands that. And ladies, please understand, I tend to use the he and his because I was born and raised in a faith that viewed God as masculine, but he is not. God is everything. So he's male and female, he's it, he's everything. Now, why I say it's time for you to start placing your concern for the other people of the world before your own also has to do with a link that I will put in the comments of this video. And I had wanted to wait till the end of the week to say these words, but by serendipity, which often happens when you're working with God, this article came to my attention last night as I was thinking of what to say today. And it warns, or it shows, that there's been several people who have suddenly been killed or made to look like committed suicide or died, who were working in fields that might unlock unconstrained energy under the justification of its national security. But really, it's more likely to protect the status quo. I want you to really think about the implications of unconstrained energy. If you can build yourself a piece of equipment, and the design I put out, you can. In fact, there will be several designs if I ever get the funding to scientifically prove the theory. It's proven to me in my heart and soul by God, because he's the one who gave the plans to me. Likewise, I have to say and publish that the cooperation, the game everyone wins, and the cooperation economic system are mine up to now because I'm the human who put them forward. But trust me, they're his plan. And he's not so arrogant as to demand that we have to follow his plan. He's quite open to any human plan we want to create because he doesn't interfere with free will. A bit of a backtrack, by the way, for those of you that want to go, oh well, the first testament or the first commandment says, "I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God." The "I am a jealous God" part got added, and in fact, there's some reasonable expectation, and in some realities, it's absolutely true. These were the 10 promises. So understand, if God is existence, then you can have no other God because God is everything. So if you want to worship the Greek gods, you're still worshiping God. You want to worship plants like the Druids kind of did, or nature, if you will. You're still worshiping God. You want to worship Satan, you're still worshiping God. But churches and religions have very much served the functions of division. We have taken all of God's children and found ways to divide them up so that we can keep the people fighting with each other. That part is all human. They're all still part of God, but that's the human interfering with the divine love. So, back to the link I posted below. I did not want to say this until the end of week 2, rather than the start. But it seems it must be said. When family court assumed I was guilty of something I was innocent of, and then took my children away, in my pain, my suffering, my anger, I condemned humanity. And then I proceeded to starve myself for 17 days, planning to fully end my life, because that's when the judgment takes place, when I'm dead. However, at 17 days, Spirit entered me, if you will. God entered me, the calmness entered me, and told me to eat. It wasn't time yet. Not that what I had said or done was wrong, but it wasn't time for the condemnation. But let me make the condemnation clear. At my death, all people age 14 and over, when they die, will not have an afterlife. Now, should I die and you still haven't, would not have an afterlife, and this happens unless, and here's the thing, unless we start taking care of all the people of the world and end this nonsense of starvation and deprivation that has been blatantly caused by hierarchy. including religious hierarchy. Religions are some of the most wealthiest organizations in the world, and they try and tell people who are poor to give money so they can help the poor. Complete hypocrisy. But their job as religious leaders is to protect the religion and the system, not to do God's work. Now, at my death, that's what happens. Unless we start solving the hunger and starvation problem, the deprivation of keeping people in poverty, that's what's going to happen. Exceptions to that will be people who were born in severe deprivation, so they really have no say in their lives. And to be clear about that, because a lot of North Americans and developed world people think that, oh, I live in such deprivation. No, if you're living in most of the developed worlds, you don't know what real deprivation is yet. I would say there's maybe less than 1% of the people who live in the developed world who know what true deprivation is or have lived in true deprivation. So there are exemptions among those. In Canada and United States, some of the one group that will have the largest amount of exemptions will be what we call First Nations in Canada. They tend to call Indians in United States, because religions and governments have caused them so much damage over many generations that they have to worry about their own survival. But yet, amazingly and beautifully, some of them are worrying about the survival of nature even at the cost of their own lives. Now, I won't be the judge of who gets exempted or not. That will be God. So if you think about it, most souls of this planet will actually be exempt because we have such a huge portion of our population born and raised and forced to live in constant deprivation. But there will also be large amounts that are not getting there. Period. Now, why did I have to bring this up today? Because as the article you'll see that I give a link to in the comments, I might get murdered because I have also supplied a weapon of mass destruction powered by gravity. I haven't supplied it yet, but I have it, and they do not want that to get out to the public. And so I need to be clear. Although this hunger strike is to the death, or until I am able, given the money, to prove that unconstrained energy can be made from gravity, I am not suicidal. It's funny how many people have already, acquaintances have already contacted me to challenge me and make me worry that, Michael, you're coming across as a madman. You're not really helping your own cause. Da 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 da. Folks, it's interesting that we see someone as a hero for running into a burning building to try and save a child. at great risk to their life or possibly permanent physical damage. But they're a hero. But somebody risking their life to try and save over 8,000 children per day is seen as suicidal. Do you not recognize the hypocrisy? It's blatant. Oh yes, but yours is self-harm. Well, so is running into a burning building. So is risking your life to fight in a war or against crime or anything. It's funny, recently I've kind of, to save on brain power in order to make my body survive longer, I've gotten into watching mindless TV. And recently I've watched a whole bunch of, or watched the entire 24 series. I can't count the number of times that Jack Bauer basically did a suicide mission. He went into situations where it's him or one other against 10, 15, 20, 30 people. Some of them where they actually said, Jack, that's a suicide mission. But yet we see him as a hero. When he was in to do something, despite the fact it's against all odds that he'll survive and accomplish his goal. Well, I'm in the same boat. You're right. The odds of getting people to recognize their faults and the need to save the children of the world, the children of God, are slim. So when I entered this poverty strike, it was with the full understanding that I would likely starve to death because of the high level of apathy, and probably even stronger than apathy is defeatist mentality that, oh well, nothing can be done. People, there's been one universal truth throughout all of history: the mob rules. But this, and it's just a case of when all the people come together over something, which sadly tends to be over anger, governments have to listen. Now you might be saying, oh yeah, but look at places in the world where they're protesting and the governments aren't listening. Yes, but that's because they also know they've convinced some of the people to support the government regardless. And so they still have the people divided. This time, you are requested to come together for love. The emotion that's to bind you and guide you and drive you is love. Thus says the Lord. Thank you for your time today. More tomorrow.